Hello everyone, today I'm going to show you how to make this Art Deco beaded Kumihimo bracelet, and this is what mine looks like here with obviously the colours that I've used. So you have the Kumihimo braid running down the middle, and then I just added, using the SuperDuos in the braid, the extra SuperDuos and other beads there to give that Art Deco effect, and then also some bicones to give a really nice bling to it. And both sides are exactly the same, and it then looks like this on. So you can see it gives that really nice effect. And it sits really comfortably and nicely on the wrist as well. And this bracelet is about a size 7.5 inch. Obviously, depending what clasp you add, you can add whatever kind of clasp that you prefer. But then in this tutorial here, I'm going to show you how to make it. So if you'd like to learn, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we're going to need. What I have here is my round Kumihimo disc because it's a round braid that we're making. And then for the braid, I'm using this 0.4mm S-lon. I'm just using a black one because the main beads in the braid are black, so it'll be obviously a nice match. And then as for the beads that I'm using for the braid, it's these two here. So I'm using 8/0s for the main part of the braid here. These are opaque black. And then I'm also using SuperDuos. These specific ones are Metalist Turquoise. I think they go really lovely together because the black make that colour really stand out. But you can obviously combine your colours however you want to, but it's the SuperDuos in the braid that we're then going to use to add our embellishments on the sides as well. And for that I'm using these 11/0 Miyuki seed beads, also in opaque black, and then also for a bit of bling I'm using these 2.5mm Swarovski bicones in AB because they're going to really give a nice sparkle to the piece then. And to then be able to add in those embellishments afterwards here, I'm using an S-lon size D thread, so it's going to be nice and fine but also strong. And then also obviously some beading needles to use with that thread. And then finally I have the findings as well, so I'm going to use these Kumihimo ends to finish off the braid with, and then use them to attach my findings. So my Lost Claw clasp extender chain here, and then using jump rings to attach it all together. So let's get all the materials ready and let's get started. So now we need to cut some lengths of our cord, and what I have here is 4 lengths of about 1 meter each of the S-lon that we're going to be using for the braid. And then what I've done is I put all the ends together to make them even, and then I fold them over in half, so put all the ends together again like that to find where the midpoint is, and then I just tie a regular overhand knot to keep them together, and then I put a piece of scrap wire around here to help pull it down through the disc. So now we just need to take these cords here and attach them to our disc. So I then took the midpoint with the wire and put that wire down through the hole in the centre of the disc. It's coming out on the other side. That's how we're going to help pull it down through here. And then I distributed the cords, so I have 2 cords on either side of the top dot, 2 on either side of the bottom dot there, so they're straight opposite each other, and the same on the sides as well. So we have pairs opposite each other distributed around the disc like this. And then I want to start making the braid here, but I want to make a little section of braid before we start adding in any beads. So what I'm going to do is take my top left cord, release that from the slotted end, bring that down to the bottom of the disc, and place that into this slot, staying to the left of the bottom pair. And then I'm going to take the right one of the bottom 2, bring that up and stay on the right side, and then turn my disc to the next pair, and then do the exact same thing. So I'll take the top left one here, bring that down, stay on the left side, and then I'll take the bottom right one, bring that up and stay on the right side, and then turn my disc again for the next pair. And you basically want to continue like this, moving your cords like this and then turning to the next pair until we have about 1 or 2 centimeters of braid. So now I have my little section of braid here. You can start to see it coming out on the back. Then we've now reached the point where we want to start adding in the beads. So this is then how you want to add the beads to all the lengths of cord here to achieve this pattern for the braid. Now as you can see, some of these cords have only got 8/0s on. That's the top 2, the bottom 2, and the top one on the right side and the bottom one on the left side. All of these have got 46 8/0s on. And as for the other 2 cords here, the only ones that are different are the ones with the SuperDuos on. That's the top one on the left side and the bottom one on the right side. What we have is the pattern here is 1 8/0, 1 SuperDuo, 1 8/0, 1 SuperDuo, and so on all the way. And what I have is 22 SuperDuos separated out by 1 8/0, and it both starts with 1 and ends with 1 8/0 as well. And it's the exact same on the other one as well. So how I set up these beads here is to accommodate for the way that I work with my braid. So I start with my top left one. So that means if you start with the top left one or the bottom right one, because they're the same as each other, then you can just set up the beads like this and achieve the same effect. But if you start with either the top right one or the bottom left one, that's slightly different here, then what you'll need to do is set them up a bit differently. So what that means is you need to imagine that you have a mirror in front of your disc here, and then you need to set up your beads in that mirror image. So what that would mean is that the top two, not the cords themselves, but just the positioning of the beads, that will swap place. Obviously it doesn't matter here because they're the same anyway, and the same with the bottom two. But where it does matter is on the side, because that's where we have the different ones. So that means the top ones here, the one on each side, would swap over with each other. Again, just where the beads are positioned, not the cords themselves. And the same with the bottom ones here. So basically it's just where the SuperDuos are, they would end up swapping places. That way you'll achieve the same effect, but if you work differently than me. And so I also just want to mention about the size of this bracelet. So you can change that easily by either making the braid longer or shorter depending what you need. And all you would do is, if you want to make it longer, you just add some more beads. So in the 8/0s here, where there's just 8/0s, you can just add some more 8/0s to continue them. And you want to make sure you add the same amount on all of them. And where you have the SuperDuos, you just continue the pattern as it is. So in the end here, you would add another SuperDuo, 8/0, SuperDuo, until you then have the same amount of beads extra on all the lengths of cord. And it's the same principle if you want to make it shorter, you just take the same amount of beads away on each length as well, making sure it's the same so the braid still stays consistent. But otherwise, once you have all the beads on here that you want to use, then it's time to start adding them into the braid. So to do that, we just want to continue with the same technique as before. So I'm going to take my top left cord, and then as I'm releasing the cord though, I'm going to also then just grab my very first bead, and then as I'm releasing the cord, I'm letting that drop into the middle. And I'm making sure that that tucks underneath the cord in the middle there. And then bring it down. And then the bottom right cord, as I'm releasing that, I'm going to then also let my first bead drop down. Make sure it goes underneath the cord in the middle there, that goes out to the side. And then place it on the top. So that's the first pair. Now turn it to your next pair. And then just keep repeating the same thing. So the most important thing here is to make sure every time we move a cord, we drop one bead down, and then it goes into the middle, and making sure it tucks underneath the cords in the middle. And also making sure that it stays there, because that's how it ends up on the outside of the braid and we get the pattern that we want. So just continue like this. So now I've braided a bit further on, and I've reached the first SuperDuo that I need to add in. So I'm just going to show you that. It's the exact same way. You add your bead here by dropping it down when you're releasing the cord, and making sure that SuperDuo also just goes underneath the cord going out to the side, and then bring it down. And what you'll find is, it will most likely happen naturally, is that you have one hole where the cord is going through, and that naturally sits kind of inside the braid, and then you have the other hole sticking out of the braid and away from it, and that's exactly how we want them to sit. So that's the only thing really with the SuperDuos to keep an eye on, but it will most likely happen naturally. And then the other one here as well, drop it down, and then place it underneath. You can see they kind of stick out on the side opposite each other, and that's exactly what we want them to sit. So just keep doing this. And I also just want to mention regarding this braid, I find that it's better to have a bit of a tighter tension with it, because that way you end up with a more even look to it and more of a straight look to the edges, where the SuperDuos are going to be sitting along the sides, you could say, of it, but they're going to be sitting more in a straight line by having a bit of a tighter tension. So it's just a bit of a tip to achieve that. So just keep doing this until you've used up all the beads here and you reach the other end of the braid. So now that I used up all the beads here, you can see I have no more left, and I have my braid coming out of the back. Then we just need to finish off this end the same way that we started it. So just make a little section of braid without adding beads in. So I'm just going to continue where I would take my next cord, and then what will happen here is the braid will naturally singe in, and you just want to do this for another 1 to 2 centimeters as well. So now what I want to do is get my braid off the disc, but I want to do it securely so it doesn't come undone. So what I'm going to do is take cords that are diagonally opposite each other from the pair that I was due to take next. So I'm going to start with these two here, then I'm going to bring them across the middle and then tie them together in a knot, and then tighten that down right at the end of the braid and leave them out. Then I'm going to take the other two from the same pair and do the same thing, tie a knot right at the end of the braid, and I'm going to move to the next pair and do the exact same thing. with cords diagonally opposite each other here. So we're securing it off nicely. We can take it off the disc without having to worry about it because we're going to keep working with it. But also we're not adding too much bulk to the end because we obviously want to be able to finish it off nicely and neatly. And the last one here, tie a knot, and because this is the last one, I just want to tie a double knot. It gives more security than just one can come undone easily. Just like that, much more easily. And there we go. Can now take it completely off disc, and then what we want to do is get this braid ready so we can actually start adding the embellishment onto it as well. And to do that, what I want to do is get rid of this wire, so just take that off. And then on this end, I want to get rid of the excess cords here. So I'm just going to put a bit of glue around where they're coming out from, where the knots are, cut them down, and then I have both ends ready, and then we can start working on the embellishment here. So then we have the braid ready here for the next step of adding in the next few beads. So what we then also need to do is prepare our thread and needles, because obviously we need to use them to add the beads. So what I've taken here is about a wingspan length of the thread, and then I've added one needle onto each end, and I've just made sure to put a bit of a tail through, about even, and then we can release those tails as we go and we need more thread. Just makes it a little bit easier to work with. And then first off here, I just want to attach my thread and needles to the braid. So I'm going to start on one end here and then go through attaching it downwards, just the thread, or the cord, sorry, rather, in the braid. And just put one through, and then I just want to make sure they're fairly even. So I have about an equal length of thread on both sides here, on either needle. Just because we don't want to run out of thread on one side too much before the other side. We want to make sure we have enough on both sides here. And then, to fasten it a bit more securely, I'm just going to go back and forth here a few times in the braid. So, back through from side to side, moving a little bit, millimetre or two, away from where the thread is coming out. Just so it secures it nicely. And then, I want to make sure to end up with one thread on each side of the braid, and then I'm going to work my thread up towards where the beads start as well. So coming from this side now, I'm going to go through it and then actually go through more the middle of the braid, so like this, and then I want the needle to come out just before the very first bead here, right on the edge. So bring it all the way up and through the braid, like that here, and then we need to get a thread and needle up towards the very first SuperDuo. So I'm just going to show you on one side because it's the exact same thing on the other side here. So what I'm then going to do is actually go through that first bead. So what you'll find is, if we're looking at the first SuperDuo, there's going to be two seed beads in the braid right in front of it, next to each other there. Then we have another bead and then the bead on the end. So we're going to have three beads kind of diagonally from the SuperDuo and then down to the one that we want to go through. So I'm going through that one, but then I'm also wanting to go through that second one diagonally across. So just through those very first two seed beads in the braid, getting closer towards the SuperDuo. So just something like that. Because this is then the second one in we want to come out of for when we start adding in our beads, getting up to that very first SuperDuo, because we don't want to be able to see too much thread or anything. So I'm then going to bring in some of the beads. So first of all, I'll take my 11-Os here and pour some of them out. And then I also want to get in my SuperDuos. I'm going to be using them still to add in. So just get a few ready. And then from the bead in the braid to the very first SuperDuo, I just want to add in some of the 11-Os here. So I'm going to grab two of them. And again, like I said, this is basically just to hide the thread. And then go through that very first SuperDuo in the outer hole that hasn't been used with the needle. And you'll find that those two seed beads that we just added in, avoiding a knot here, will fit just perfectly in that gap between that seed bead and the SuperDuo and cover up the thread just like that. So that's kind of the beginning part, And now what I just recommend you do is you do the exact same thing on the other side. So just flip it over if you need to. Use the thread on the other side, get to that very first seed bead in the braid and get out through the second one, and then get up to your very first SuperDuo, adding in the 11/0 as well. And then we can start actually getting into the proper pattern of adding in the beads that we want to on the edges. So then basically what we want to do now is fill in the gaps between all the SuperDuos. So I'm going to jump from SuperDuo to the next one to the next one. But obviously we just want to add in some of these beads in between them. So from the very first one to the second SuperDuo, I'm going to add in 3 SuperDuos. Just get 3 on your needle here, and then just jump straight to the next SuperDuo in the outer hole again and pull all the way through. Now what you're going to notice is they're going to sit kind of wonky as we're going through doing this, but don't worry about that now. We want them to sit like this, like a fan almost, but as we're adding them now they're going to want to kind of flop all over the place. But just add them in, because when we go back through and add the bicones, they're going to get sorted out properly and latest how we want them to. But that's the first ones. And in the next gap, I want to add 3 of my 11/0 onto my needle and just jump to the next SuperDuo after that. And then that fills in that gap nicely. And don't worry about pulling it really tight now or anything, just add them in. Don't have any loose thread if you can help it. But obviously we can just go with that at the end before moving on to the next step as well, just double checking it. And then again, the next one I add in 3 SuperDuos, jump to the next SuperDuo in the braid, and then add 3 11/0 after that. And then fill in that gap between the SuperDuos. Just like that. And you basically just want to continue like this, so alternating them throughout like this, every other one. And of course you want to do the same thing on the other side, start with your SuperDuos and then just repeat the exact same thing until you reach all the way to the other end. So now that I reached the other end here on both sides, then making sure as well that you have your thread nice and tight so we don't have any loose thread that's wrapped around anywhere or SuperDuos sticking out further than you want them to. So just make sure to double check that throughout, because that's what we can correct it now. We can't really do anything about it later on. Because what I'm then going to do here is, again, the same on both sides. I'm just going to show you on here. We need to get from this SuperDuo back down to the braid and towards the end with just the cord. So I'm going to take 2 of the 11/0 and then go through that bead right across from the SuperDuo in the braid that has then the 2 next to each other in between them. Go through that one and again also through the very last one right on the edge. Again, just to hide that thread, make it a nice transition. And then here I'm just going to go straight down into the braid and then just start making my way a little bit towards the end to help hide the thread. Go through it here and come out on the other side. And sometimes I find it easier to just grab my needle with a pair of pliers so you can get a much better grip if it's struggling a little bit. But come through here. And then it's going through like that that then helps also kind of hold all this in place that we've done so far. And you can just give it a nice extra tug. Make sure to double check everything. Are you happy with it? And then you want to go through a few times and do the same with the other side here with both threads and needles, and then come back up towards both sides here again, because then what we need to do is get to a position where we can then get on the outer edge and obviously use the outer holes in the SuperDuos. So then down here on the bottom, what I then want to just show you is where we need to come out from. So I've gone through the end of the braid there a few times, and then I want to go back through the beads the same way as before, so through those first 2 that's in the braid, and then from there we then need to start moving upwards to the outer edge. So what I'm going to do is go through the first bead of those 11/0 that I added in to get to the first SuperDuo, just through the first one on its own, and just pull your thread through. And obviously again we're doing this on both sides, and then we're coming out from here, and this is now we want to start adding in the extra beads on the outer edge and also incorporating the other hole in the SuperDuos. So what we also then need to get in is we're going to still use these 11/0, but we then also need to get our bicones ready. So I have them here. And then, to begin with, where we're coming out from, what we need to do is add 1 11/0 and 1 bicone, and then 1 11/0. So the bicone is in the middle, and then I go through the very first SuperDuo out of this batch of 3 in the outer hole. So I'm jumping from that little 11/0 and then to the outer hole in the first SuperDuo, like that. I'm just going to pull it nicely, and then it's going to basically make a nice little path there, again to hide the thread to get into the proper pattern. And then now we're in this little section of the SuperDuos. So now we're going to get into kind of filling in the gaps and making the rest of the pattern. So what I'm then going to do is add one bicone here to go to the next SuperDuo. So I'm adding 1 bicone and then going through the middle SuperDuo, again in the outer hole that hasn't been used. And then that bicone is going to pop right in between there and fit just perfectly. And then another bicone and go through the last SuperDuo of those 3. And again pop in between them. And then what I just like to do is put my fingers on both sides of them and then just pull at the thread nicely to make sure all the bicones sit just perfectly in between, and it kind of evens it all out a bit. So now we've done this first little section, now we need to get to the next one. And to do that, what I'm going to then do is add 1 11/0, 1 bicone again, and then another 11/0. So the bicone is in the middle again, basically just like the first ones we added. Then I'm going to jump straight over to the next section of 3 SuperDuos. So I'm coming through the last one and I'm going to go through the first one and the next one, because it's a bit of a bigger gap there we have to cover. Again, always working in the outer holes of the SuperDuos now that haven't been used. And then pull that, and you can see that's going to fit just perfectly there. And then we reach that next batch of SuperDuos, and we basically just repeat now. So that means we need to add 1 bicone, go through the next SuperDuo, and then another bicone, and through the last SuperDuo in this batch. And again, remember, just going to put my fingers on and just tug it in nicely, just to make sure it all gets nice and tight and we don't have loose thread and anything wrapping around anywhere. And then to get to the next section, we repeat 1 11/0, 1 bicone, and 1 11/0. So the bicone again is in the middle, and jump to the next one. Just like that, to fill in that bigger gap. And then we just keep going like this. So you can see this is the effect we're going to end up getting. There's a really nice kind of outer edge. It's a bit scallop, but also to give this Art Deco effect. We just keep going like this all the way to the other end. And of course you want to repeat the exact same thing on the other side as well, using the other thread and needle. And then once we get down here, all there's really left to do is finish it off. So you just want to do that the same way that we started it. That means you add 1 11/0, 1 bicone and 1 11/0 after you come out of the last SuperDuo, and then go through. In this case, we're looking from here, it's the second one of the 2 11/0s we added in that little thread path to bridge the gap, the one that's closest to the braid, and then we'll go through the beads in the braid as well. And then all that's left to do down here is finish off the thread. And then I just want to show you how I finish off the thread as well. So I'm coming out of this corded section, then I'm going to go back through it a few times like I said the other times as well to secure it, and then I'm going to start tying a couple of knots. So I'm just going to go back through just like before. Just going to have to use my pliers here. And then before pulling it all the way through, I just want to make sure I leave a little loop here before I then come back through again to the same side where that loop is. Just bring it all the way through, because then I'm going to use that loop to then make my knot. So make sure you grab hold of that. Then I take my needle through the loop here twice, and then I can pull it tight, and that pulls the loop but then also at the same time forms the knot, and pull it nice and tight there. And then again just go through the cord in the braid and just do a couple of knots like this. And then once you then got some knots in place, you can cut off the excess, and obviously do the same thing with the other thread as well. And then all that's left to do really is finish off the ends using these Kumihimo ends. Gonna fit just perfectly right in the end of the cord, the braided section, using some glue, and then we can use them to attach our findings as well, so the lock, whatever lock that you like to use. So I've already got a tutorial where I show how to use these Kumihimo ends here, so I'm going to put a link to that in the description box below. So finish it off completely, and then once you have the ends in place and finished off and attached your clasp, then you have your finished bracelet. So this is then the bracelet done. I have to have attached my endings there and my clasp, so you get this really nice Art Deco look on the sides, and obviously adding those bicones in really gives it some extra bling as well. Then I can just use the clasp here, and it's ready to start wearing. So that's what it looks like. So that Kumihimo braid in the middle, and then you add in those beads on the edges to give it a completely different look. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you very much for watching.